Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Kate, may we have the roll call, please?
Gary Cunningham.
Here.
Patty Crowan.
Here.
Doug Bryson.
Here.
Marie McFarland.
Here.
Sean Keir.
Here.
Miles Schlesinger.
Here.
Steve Griffiths.
Here. Are there any agenda changes or revisions?
Yes, I would ask that you flip the order of items 6.1 and 6.2, the public hearings, and hold the item 6.2, the temporary emergency operation uses first.
All right, we will do that. All right, we now come to the public comment period of our meeting. If you would like...
No, you skipped something.
Minutes.
Oh, excuse me. Is there a motion to approve the minutes for our October 16th meeting?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second? Do we have a second?
Who is the second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
The minutes have been approved. We're now at the public comment session of our meeting on non-agenda items. If you would like to talk tonight on a subject that's not related to our public hearings tonight, you're welcome to do so. And you will have 3 minutes per speaker. And keep in mind that you're being broadcast on live TV. Would anybody like to participate in the public comment period tonight? Seeing none, thank you. No final orders, resolutions, or written communications this evening. We do have a public hearing deliberations, and the first up is Z08 2018-06, temporary emergency operations uses. It is now 6:03 p.m. The public hearing for file Z08 2018-06 is now open. This public hearing concerns a city-initiated proposal to amend Title 17 zoning in Chapter 17.80, provisions applying to special use, to add a new section 17.80.140, temporary emergency operation uses during declared emergency. The ordinance establishes standards and timelines for temporary emergency operation uses during emergencies declared under LCMC 2.72.070, the city's emergency operations ordinance. The Planning Commission's role in the legislative process is to consider any written or oral comments or testimony, as well as information from staff, and present a recommendation to the City Council, who will hold an additional public hearing. The City Council may adopt the Planning Commission recommendation, may adopt a different recommendation, or may take other action. The Commission must take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the Commission wish to declare an ex parte contact or a conflict of interest in this matter? Seeing none. The substantive criteria that apply to this hearing include the statewide planning goals, the city's comprehensive plan, and the applicable provisions of the city's zoning ordinance. Comments and testimony should be directed to these criteria or to other criteria that you believe apply to the subject of this hearing. Before the staff presents a report, I'll summarize the adopted public hearing procedures. The staff will present a report and respond to any questions. After that, any person may speak for up to 3 minutes. If the Planning Commission has questions, your time responding to any questions from us will not be counted in your time limit. If you wish to speak, please write your name and mailing address clearly on a sign-up list at the entrance. Please speak directly into the microphone and begin by stating your name only. Don't give us your address. If you also have written testimony to submit into the record, please provide a copy to the recorder. Kate is our recorder this evening. Will the staff please present its report?
So I'm assuming I'm doing this.
We can't hear you, Richard.
I'm assuming that I'm going to be doing this one, so I'll give you the background. The Red Cross wanted the city to sign an agreement that said in an emergency we can use the community center as an emergency shelter. If you're a property owner, you obviously want to look at the zoning before you agree to let someone use your property. And if you look at the park zoning where the community center is located, emergency shelters are not located in that zone. So this kind of pointed out an issue that even in an emergency, we hadn't really planned on, in terms of emergency planning, emergency operation uses. So first thing, I guess, this is not an amendment, this is not a quasi-judicial amendment, this is not about the warming shelter in Taft. This is about doing emergency planning, and essentially the example that I posed for City Council is that we're going to have some bad weather, 20-degree nights, freezing precipitation, and it's going to be about 5 days in length, and it's going to start in about 48 hours, and that could cause a problem here on the coast. We're not really set up for that. So the manager goes to the City Council and says, we need to have a special or emergency meeting, and the manager basically says, hey, the conditions are such that I think it constitutes an emergency. I would like to have the council declare an emergency so we can request assistance from the state of Oregon to get plows and ice machines or whatever, salting machines to clear the roads, and we're going to have to bring in some extra staff to deal with frozen pipes and water breaks and the like, and that we may need to do other things like go to the community center and set up a warming shelter for people that have no other place to go. So after you go to the council at a special meeting and you say, this is what I think the emergency is, and this is what I think from the list of powers that we have in the code, the emergency code, what we can do in the event of emergency, what do you want to do? And the council would then make a decision. Yes, it's an emergency. Yes, these are the things we'd like to do in response to the emergency. The emergency will be of this length. And then, we write it up, and that's the emergency declaration. So in this example, we would get assistance from the state or the county or other jurisdictions. We may impose curfews. We could do road closures. But one of the things we added to the code was a provision that we could designate temporarily places on public property, city property, for emergency operation uses. And so emergency operation uses were, for example, a temporary shelter, the language includes overnight shelters, bivouacs, mess halls, emergency campgrounds, staging areas, inoculation centers, distribution centers, and similar emergency operation uses. So obviously when you have an emergency, you may have to have some temporary facilities. But we wanted to make sure we were providing for them. And the difference here would be you could go to the park zone, and we could say in the park zone, an emergency shelter is now a permitted use, right? But if you did that, you would have conflict between the recreation use of parks and this other emergency use. Well, emergency use is intended to be temporary use. And so when we go through the analysis of whether or not this is going to have an impact on our land use goals and our statewide planning goals and our comprehensive plan goals, the first factor we look at is that, well, this is intended only to be used infrequently when there's a declared emergency. An emergency under the code isn't just oh, it's an emergency. It's, you got to come to the council and convince them that it's an emergency. And then it's going to be temporary, because one of the elements of an emergency declaration is an estimated duration of the emergency. So the language that we're proposing to add would basically limit the authorization for temporary emergency operation uses to the duration of the emergency, and then whatever time necessary for the wrap-up or demobilization not to exceed 60 days. So in the example, we can declare an emergency and say, okay, the community center will be used for this purpose for these 5 days, and then we have to cease that use as soon as possible after we've demobilized, but certainly not to exceed 60 days. And so that's a limitation on when we do it and who does it, the council, and for the length of time. And the major import of that is that should result in no adverse impact to our land use regulatory system. As I was preparing findings, which you don't have because I was writing them for the council, one of the things that occurred to me was, well, in the text we said you can locate this temporary emergency operation use in any zone except open space. Okay, so you put it anywhere except the open space zone. Well, open space, obviously, we have native vegetation and trees and things like that, and we bought it with restricted funds, and we can't just use it for any purpose. But as I went through the statewide planning goals and our comprehensive plan goals, it occurred to me that we might want to add some language, and I want you to think about this after you hear from the public, whether or not we should add something to address other resources. So when I was looking at the goals, we have statewide planning goals for beaches and dunes and protection of estuaries and protection of Goal 5 resources. And we might want to add some language to the code that would or to this proposed language, which would address those, like I did for open space. You might say a location for a temporary emergency operation use would have to exclude undeveloped coastal shorelands, undeveloped beaches and dunes, and may not be immediately adjacent to estuarine areas. So if we want to make sure, and the rationale for excluding open space areas was that those properties were bought with restricted funds and they were intended to be set aside and preserved. We also have other goals, Goal 5 resources and coastal shorelands and beaches and dunes, which we probably don't want to just say, oh yeah, go ahead, fill that wetland with, debris from the storm. That'll be fine, because once you destroy a resource, you've destroyed it. So I'm suggesting that you may want to offer as a condition or a recommendation here that the text add some limitation on when we talk about undeveloped resources, undeveloped, unaltered Goal 5 resources or coastal shorelands. We can't get in there. If we have something that's close to the shoreline and it's, paved parking lot, that's different. But if you have native vegetation and natural resource that you want to protect, so that's a thought. So the actual text of the amendment would just, this is a corollary to the emergency operations ordinance. So the emergency operations ordinance has been amended to specifically authorize the city council to designate in an emergency declaration order certain, like, city property and say, okay, we're going to use this city property for this use. So that ordinance has already been amended. This is a corollary because we want to make sure that the state of Oregon, the LCD, knows that we're going to do this in the event of an emergency. So I know we could have, if there was an emergency, we could just say, okay, we're going to, under our emergency operations ordinance, we're just going to designate the community center as a shelter and just do it. But we're trying to make sure that the LCD and the public understand that we care about land use and that we don't want to do things, even if they're temporary things, that would interfere with our land use regulatory scheme. So a temporary emergency operation use would be permitted in any zone. Again, it's temporary, except for open space and maybe with some caveats about Goal 5 and shorelands. And they won't be required to comply with lot size, parking, landscaping, yard requirements, and they are not going to go through site plan review. Why? Because it's an emergency, we don't have time. Also, they will be of limited duration. They're intended to terminate when the emergency is ended or within as soon as possible to wrap things up or demobilize, not to exceed 60 days. It has to be authorized in an emergency order. Okay, it can't just be, you know, Richard Townsend one day says, oh, I think this will be permitted as an emergency. It's got to be a council emergency declaration order that says, hey, this is an emergency and here's the measures we're going to take to deal with the emergency. City property is the first preference, may be sited on city property, except for open space properties, and the buildings or property must meet the need created by the emergency. So if you want, for example, to have an emergency shelter, that property we designate for the use, like the community center, needs to meet the need. Well, the community center has the appropriate building code requirements. It's a sprinkled building. We're not going to pick a building that doesn't comply with the building code requirements as an emergency shelter. So, you know, it was suggested that this amendment was about the Taft warming shelter and this would be used to allow the Taft warming shelter. Well, no, they don't have sprinklers. So this wouldn't be used by them or for them. Again, and this is the city designating a property for its own property for an emergency operations use. Now, we could ask the state or the county if they have property that's suitable, and we could designate their property because emergency operations oftentimes involve intergovernmental cooperation. We did allow for the temporary designation of private property with the approval or agreement of the property owner. And so the example I use there would be, let's say there's a storm and we have a lot of vegetation, debris, and we're in the process with city resources and state resources and county resources of clearing that debris, and we need a place to put it. Well, we could put it in the parking lot of the community center, but we probably have a higher priority use for that area. So we might, if someone has some vacant land and it wouldn't, you know, it's not a wetland and it's not an open space property or something, we could ask them if we could store that vegetative debris there. So that would be an example of appropriating. We're not going to commandeer their property without their consent, but we could ask for permission and use their property if they agreed. And again, the whole idea is it's temporary. That's pretty much the gist of what the amendment is about. I guess we need to take public comment and see if any members of the public have issues, but
or
questions from council or
Prior to that, if commissioners have any questions for you. Yeah. Yes, Patty?
I do. So am I clear that the designation of an emergency is a discretionary action by the council? It isn't really defined anywhere because it's an emergency, so it could be.
Well, I mean, there are state statutes about emergency operations, and we have charter authority, and we have our own ordinance. It's Chapter 272 of our code, which is our emergency operations ordinance, and it sets forth the procedure for the declaration of an emergency. It defines emergency, and so the council, it will be, there is a situation when the manager could declare the emergency, but that is very, there just isn't time to have a emergency or special council meeting. But that, any emergency declaration by the manager is subject to ratification by the council, and that has to happen. It's not like he can declare it and then months can go by. If you don't have time, because, you know, there's a tsunami approaching, we're not going to try to call a special council meeting.
Yeah.
But if we do declare an emergency for whatever, don't have time to get the council together, the very first opportunity we can have the council together, they have to ratify it. So
they
there's a
can do it
process.
retroactively,
Yeah.
basically. Okay. And the only other question I have is on the issue of private property. And do I understand correctly that whatever private property would be used at the owner's agreement would have to meet the code requirements for, like you mentioned, sprinkled? So, for example, someone with a 5-bedroom house can't say, I'm going to open my house up as a shelter, and I agree that the city can use it, because that house would likely not meet the requirements of a shelter in the city code. Is
Well,
that correct?
Yeah, the intention is not for a way to violate zoning. Okay, so if we as a government have a need and you have a building which meets that need, we may ask you, or you may offer for us to use that during an emergency. But if you have a building that doesn't meet our need and you offer it, I don't think we as the city are going to place people at risk by selecting a building or a property which could be in itself dangerous because it doesn't meet the actual need. So, I mean, again, the council will make the decision about what measures to implement, and but if it doesn't meet the need for, again, the community center is a good example. It has everything we need for an emergency shelter. Why would we choose a property that doesn't meet those needs?
Well, but if you had to house, some people, and you have a bunch of vacant vacation rentals around, are you saying that the council would not approve that?
Well, I mean, again, a shelter use is different than dwelling. A vacation rental dwelling is, for the most part, built to single-family home standards, unless it exceeds 16 occupants, in which case it has to be built to commercial standards, and I think we have exactly zero in terms of those. So, again, I don't think we would, again, this is city emergency operations.
Sure.
Okay, and while
Yeah.
we like to cooperate with other governmental entities and not-for-profit organizations and private citizens, we can't take control of a property.
Sure.
And if it doesn't meet the need, we could be putting people in harm's way. So,
As far as the building code's concerned, that's a call by the building official. It's not a zoning issue. The building official would decide whether it meets the standards or not. Or like what's been done in the past is, even if a building, for instance, isn't sprinklered, if there's adequate egress and there is someone familiar with the property who's awake all night, then that's considered okay, because they can help with evacuation and guide people out. But it's a building official call. The planning department, other than the building official or the city council or anybody for that matter, doesn't have the authority to make that call. Only the building official does.
Any other questions? Could you, yes.
I'm just reading over your communication to the council, and you're quoting the present statute we have. And I'm not understanding the difference in that language versus...
Excuse me, Doug, could you please speak into your microphone?
Sorry. So I'm reading over your communication you have with the council, and I'm not understanding the difference in the ordinance that we already have in place versus the one that you want to include now? They seem to be worded the same.
Yeah, this one is a corollary. It's related to the one that exists, but the one that was adopted is under basically the city's authority, charter authority, and statutory authority for emergency operations. So the authority is different. This ordinance is amending the zoning code to acknowledge that we have that other ordinance, and so they're tied together. I'm trying to let them know that we've got this emergency operations ordinance, it's got this authority, but we're not trying to pull a fast one on DLCD. We want them to know that we take land use seriously, and that when we have a temporary emergency operation use, we want them to know, and we want to be authorized by them, through their authority, the land use planning authority, to have those temporary uses, and they're not going to feel that we've violated zoning because we've provided for it. We've planned ahead, and we've let them know. And if we're appropriate, we've placed certain limitations on these temporary emergency operation uses. You know, the duration being the most important, but the limitation on the council is the one that approves the emergency, and we set forth in the emergency declaration order what the measures are that we're taking to address the emergency, including designating properties for temporary emergency uses.
Anything else? I have a question for you. You referenced, I think, something in the statewide planning goals about natural areas that might need protection in addition to open spaces. Could you read through that list again slowly?
Well, you have Goal 5 resources. You have
That's Code 5?
Goal 5.
Goal 5.
Goal
okay.
5 resources, where typically the city has designated certain natural resources as a Goal 5 resource to be protected. We have coastal shorelands, beaches and dunes, and estuarine resources. So those are basically the headings of certain of your statewide planning goals. So I think that it's important not to locate a temporary emergency operation use on undeveloped Goal 5 resources, undeveloped beach and dune areas. I mean, obviously, if we have vacant, cleared land, that's where you might store, you know, debris from a storm. You wouldn't go find a nice pristine wetland and start dumping things. So I think we should probably address that. I don't have exact language, but I think that you could recommend that we consider adding some language to ensure that we don't end up citing these temporary uses on sensitive lands, basically.
Thank you. Any further questions for staff?
I just have one more.
One more.
I'm
Yep,
sorry,
Patty?
just one more. So let's just say, for example, that tsunami hits and Rhodes End is cut off. And you need to establish some sort of emergency, let's say, medical facility up there, a place where people could go and get first aid. Where would you put it if you didn't put it in a private home? Because there isn't anything else really up there.
Well, obviously, the zoning in Rhodes End, and basically, we're skipping zoning, okay?
Right.
So you're only really now talking about whether or not the facility is appropriate and safe. And you're not going to have any commercially constructed buildings up in a residential area. So, but if we're talking about basically an emergency bivouac or something like that, it's a tent or it's a building, I think we'll use a building. But it's not going to meet the hospital standards.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not going to, so the private part of this doesn't necessarily meet the zoning requirements for the use that you intend it to be used for.
But I don't really believe that we would establish a facility in an area that was cut off like that. I think we would establish the area. Well, I don't think you would.
You're going to just leave us?
Yeah. See ya. No, I actually, again, I'm not the emergency operations person,
Yeah,
but.
sure.
But the intention would be to site it in an area that's appropriate. So I think it would be probably sited in something like the community center, and then we would bring people from the area and to the community center. If you needed medical attention, then we would get you there. I don't think we're going to go to an area and say, okay, let's set up something in a building where that's not appropriate. I
Okay.
think, now the language is not,
It's a
you
little
know,
squishy.
yeah, it's not precise. And there is some discretion, as Richard's telling you, that the building official has. And so the council would have to establish some parameters when they do the emergency declaration.
Okay.
But we're not going to just take someone's property and,
Yeah, no.
Establish the use if
I
it's
see
not
that
safe.
it's with their permission, so I like that part. All right, thank you.
Richard, I have a quick question. You talked about a short duration. Do you say days, weeks? Do you have a limit of
Well,
what you're considering short-term?
emergencies have different durations depending on the nature of the emergency. So in one of the jurisdictions I worked in, we had an ice storm, very similar to the example that I talked about for that I read. And it was about 5 days. But when I was in Ashland, there were wildfires in southern Oregon that lasted, the whole summer. So you may have different durations. I did not want to take a chance and arbitrarily pick a number. But obviously, if there is a need, we would, only use during the actual emergency, and then wrap up. We figured 60 days was sufficient to demobilize after the emergency had ended. So.
All right. Now is the time for public comment and testimony. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to testify on file ZOA 2018-06? Seeing none. Okay. Is there any comment from representatives of public agencies? Seeing none. If there's no further comment, is there a motion to close the public hearing and the record?
I motion to close the public hearing and the record on ZOA 2018-06.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Hi.
Any opposed? The record, public hearing and the record are closed. So, we're back to the commission. What is the pleasure of the commission?
I would like to see you add that language to protect the resources in the Goal 5 resources and the coastal and the estuary and all those.
Okay.
Please.
I'll draft some language for the council
Is there
consideration.
consensus on that from other commission members?
I agree with that.
Okay.
So unanimous consent then?
Any other discussion? Is there a motion to forward a recommendation to the city council?
With the corrected language?
Yes.
Yes, I'd motion that we forward this to the city council with the corrected language that included the Goal 5 resources.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Patty, Kate, may we have a roll call, please?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, first, just want to clarify, what is the you're forwarding it, is there a recommendation that they adopted or not adopted or whatever?
That we adopt it as
was the
written
application.
with.
I just want to make
as
sure it's
written
clear.
With,
Recommendation
5 resources
is that
included.
council approve the ordinance with the added language to address Goal 5 and other resources as noted.
Correct.
that's what I said.
Do we need a new motion or a new repeat? We're
I
fine.
think Kate has it.
Kate, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Sure. McFarland,
Yes.
Schlesinger,
Yes.
Kier,
Yes.
Crowan,
Yes.
Bryson,
Yes.
Cunningham,
Yes.
Griffiths.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. All right. It is now 6:35 PM. The public hearing for file ZOA 2018-06 is now open. This public hearing concerns a city-initiated proposal to amend Title 17 zoning in Chapter 17. Excuse me. Off on the wrong one. Okay, we'll start again. It is now 6:35 PM. The public hearing for file Z0OA 2018-02 is now open. This public hearing concerns a city-initiated proposal to amend Chapter 17.72 of the zoning ordinance. The amendments concern a number of changes to the city's sign code. The amendments will remove most content-based distinctions. Amendments add, revise, and delete a number of definitions. The draft ordinance defines flags and limits the allowed number of flags. It defines inflatable signs, pennants, and streamers, and prohibits those signs. The draft provides two options for provisions concerning non-conforming signs. The draft ordinance also includes numerous clarifications and grammatical changes. The Planning Commission's role in the legislative process is to consider any written or oral comments or testimony, as well as information from staff, and present a recommendation to the City Council, who will hold an additional public hearing. The City Council may adopt the Planning Commission recommendation, may adopt a different recommendation, or may take other action. The Commission must take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the Commission wish to declare an ex parte contact or conflict of interest in this matter? Seeing none. The substantive criteria that apply to this hearing include the statewide planning goals, the city's comprehensive plan, and the applicable provisions of the city's zoning ordinance. Comments and testimony should be directed to these criteria or to other criteria that you believe apply to the subject of this hearing. Before the staff presents a report, I'll summarize the adopted public hearing procedures. The staff will present a report and respond to any questions. After that, any person may speak for up to 3 minutes. If the Planning Commission has questions of you, your time responding to any questions will not be counted in your time limit. If you wish to speak, please write your name and mailing address clearly on the sign-up list at the entrance. Please speak directly into the microphone and begin by stating your name only. If you also have written testimony to submit into the record, please provide a copy to our recorder. Will the staff please present its report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Council, Commissioners. What you have before you tonight is a proposed revision to Chapter 17.72 of the Municipal Code. I've gone over this with you before in the past about why we want to do it. The principal reasons are to eliminate the content-based distinctions that are in the existing code, which we believe are probably unconstitutional, to make a number of grammatical changes, and also to bring the code more in line with the current status of technology on signs. What I propose to do is, you have the staff report where I list 40 changes, and what I propose to do is just go through the code, the revisions that I have up on the screen, just one by one, and if you have questions as we go along, bring them up, and I'll be happy to go over them. The first one is here on the first page. It's a new statement of purpose, lines 15 through 34. This is done just to make the purpose of the sign code more clear and be more comprehensive in saying why we're making the restrictions that are in the code. The language comes almost exclusively from the model sign ordinance that we've been working with. On the second page, on lines 5 through 8, proposing to put in a provision that says that there are other sections of the code that regulate signs, because there are other sections. I want to make sure we call that out early so that people are aware that in these other areas that relate to Ocean Lake, Taft, and Nelscott, that there are sign code provisions that may be different from or in addition to what we have in the main part of the code here in Chapter 17.72. Then we're turning to the definitions. We have a new definition for address sign that replaces the motel unit sign, and also includes street numbers, street names, and so on for identification purposes. Now, one thing that I've said was that we want to eliminate content-based distinctions, and in fact, this is a content-based distinction. We allow address signs, and we say what they're allowed to say, but there's you can have a content-based distinction if there's a compelling state need. And the idea here is that for emergency response, first responders need to know where they're going. And so there is a need for having this kind of content-based distinction. Then there's a new definition for attached sign, just to make explicit what we're talking about when we talk about the kinds of permits that are needed. Then let's see. Oh, there's a new definition for balloon sign. The existing code does not address balloon signs, and this is a sign that's attached to a balloon or lighter than air. Either it is the balloon itself or is hanging from the balloon on a cord or something. It's just later in the code, balloon signs are prohibited. So just trying to explain what is being prohibited. Then banner is amended to add more specificity, and specifically it excludes flags. Now, the language here again comes mostly from the model sign code. And I might say the model sign code, that's from the International Municipal Lawyers Association. Sorry.
Patty? Yeah.
It says, or what you've added here, and in fact it's highlighted, is a banner is temporary in nature.
Right.
Can you define what that means? Because I see banners that are not what I would consider temporary. They're there all the time.
That's one thing we're trying to address here. I think later on we say what.
What is temporary?
Well, what would you like it to say?
Well, you wrote it.
Yeah, well, maybe we need additional specificity there.
I mean,
Oh, by the way, I should say that I'm looking at Kate, that I've authorized her to jump in anytime. She's our sign queen, and she's been handling the sign applications. And,
Richard, is what the question basically, should we define by number of days what a temporary?
That's what I'm hearing. We have a couple.
well, or is it temporary if it's only out from 8 in the morning until 10 at night?
No, it would be the number of.
It would be a
number
day.
of days is what we're thinking of.
Okay, so I'm not trying to put words into your mouth, but are you thinking that these banners would be used for something like a special sale or a?
Could be for special sale, or could be, we have a section later on talks about temporary signs you don't need a permit for. And that's like, maybe you've ordered your sign, you want to open a business, you've ordered the sign, but the sign your permanent sign hasn't come yet, but you can put up a temporary sign.
Okay, so that could be a temporary banner.
Right. Or it could be, if there's a special event that you want to put up a sign for, a temporary one, you don't want to pay to have a multi-hundred or multi-$1,000 sign made up.
So do all these banners have permits associated with them?
When you say all these banners?
All the banners that we see in the city right now?
No, they do not.
Okay.
I
Is there an
believe-
intent that they will have a permit?
Have a permit or go away.
I see, okay.
That's one of the real key things. I think you may be referring to what I think of as a feather banner. It's on a long pole. I believe, I don't know this for sure, but I believe people who I believe there are some people who believe those are flags, and we exempt flags, and one of the purposes of some of the changes here is to make it explicit, what is a flag? and
Definition, yeah, I
what
saw
isn't.
that in here.
And
Okay.
the code enforcement officer, I've asked him not to enforce on that yet until the city council makes a firm decision on whether they are flags or not.
Okay.
Do we have a definition of a pennant listed here?
No.
We don't, okay.
We do have on page 9 a definition of temporary sign. Means a sign intended to be displayed for a specified period of time only and then removed. And on page 13, where you talk about temporary signs, it says that, it can only, it gets into much more detail. That's letter H.
Yeah, this talks about, you can get 2 of them, and actually that one on page 13 we'll get to, that probably needs some changes, and we can talk about that when we get to them. But in this one, you can get 2 temporary permits for temporary signs for up to 60 days each, according to that.
So I would think then if the intent is for banners to be considered temporary signage, you maybe want to move the definition under temporary signs.
Well, I think that I think what you're looking for is a number of days, but the number of days may vary depending on the type of sign. Temporary signs, and for example, there's another section of the code now that the council approved specifying what temporary signs are based on a number of other content neutral provisions that they're exempt. And a lot of those have time limitations, but they're different. So, and it's kind of worded that way. So the number of days may not be universal.
Right, and it isn't here. I mean, it's just says displayed for a specified period of time only and then removed. So I'm just wondering if to make it clearer that banners are considered in this rewrite as a temporary sign, you might want to.
Well, one of the reasons that we say that the temporary in nature is we don't want permanent banners. If someone's going to put up a permanent sign, we want it to be a real sign and not just something, printed up on a piece of cloth and draped across the storefront or something like that.
Okay.
Could we go back to balloon sign for a second? Or, it says that contains or supports an advertisement message. And I was thinking maybe we could lose the word advertisement because it seems to connote a commercial message.
Right. Just to take out the word
Advertisement.
It's a
advertisement.
message.
'Cause I wouldn't want someone to argue that the balloon they have that says, "I like beer," well, that's not an advertisement message, that's just my personal opinion, so.
Well, can they be plain balloons that don't have any message on it at all?
I don't know that.
You're raising a question that actually we're having some discussion about on staff. Is a blank sign a sign?
Well, it has,
a
it
very
may have an icon
existential
on it.
question.
Well, does it have content? If we say you can't have a blank sign, are we regulating the content?
Well, I mean, you see car dealerships all over the place that will put balloons on every car on the lot. Is that a sign? Is that allowed?
Well, we do later on say that, let me see.
Those air-filled ones are banned, right? Would be prohibited.
Now, let's see.
Well, any balloon is air-filled.
No, the little.
I know you mean the squiggly guys, but I don't know, I'm
The
just,
issue for me was, the reason why I brought it up, because I didn't want us to be appearing to make a distinction between commercial messages and non-commercial
Sure.
messages.
No, I understand
But
that.
Richard's example about the blank, or your example, the blank balloon or the blank sign is kind of like leading to, maybe we say whether or not the balloon supports a message. If you just don't want balloons because they're going to get loose and get into traffic and cause problems, then fine, it's a safety reason. It's not really, we're not regulating the content. whether or not there's anything printed on it or not. I just didn't want to make a distinction about
Yes, no, I
commercial,
understand.
non-commercial.
We had the same question come up about banners. If it's just a purple strip of cloth, for example, is that a sign? Is that regulated under this ordinance?
At that point, isn't it just a decoration?
Well, that's a
Well,
good question.
The issue comes, if that's okay, why isn't one that says open okay? Or if one is just purple, if that's okay, what if one is rainbow? Does that, to some people, there's a message in that. So, you know, you can see the issues that come up with that. Then there's the whole issue that most of those that you see are actually in the public right-of-way and are illegal for that reason, so, at this point.
So under balloon sign, you could just delete everything after tethered to a fixed location.
Could, maybe. It's something to consider.
Okay.
I didn't mean to throw us under a bus
Yeah.
there, but I was trying to address the content-based issue, the word advertisement, but I do think that, you know, do we want to outlaw balloons, period? Or do we want to outlaw, not outlaw,
Balloon
do we want
signs.
to prohibit signs that are contained on balloons? And I don't care what the message is, commercial or non-commercial. I think we want to prohibit signs on balloons.
Sorry to take you down that rabbit hole.
Okay, then, moving along, directional sign definition is changed. The principal changes are, it specifies it's only for parking lots, entrance to a parking lot, and only one per entrance. Right now, the code says you can have a directional sign to the entrance to a building, for example. And we don't put a limit on the number of directional signs you can have. Then, moving down, we take out two definitions, one for display surface area and one for district or zoning district, because neither of those are used anywhere in this chapter, so they're superfluous. Then we add a definition of flag. Mostly it comes from the model sign code, but one thing that is added is about the proportion between the hoist and fly of 1 to be between 1.7 and 1.9. It's very specific, and really where those numbers come from is the code on the dimensions of the U.S. flag, the proportions of the U.S. flag, I should say. My intent in putting that language in is to make really clear that what we call banners in the illustration wouldn't meet that standard. I should also point out that the illustrations you see that are put in the code, almost all of them will change. These are just pictures that I grabbed off the internet. I want to use photos that we have permission to use from the photographer or whoever has the rights to them. So.
Is there any consideration for limiting the size of the flag that can be flown? Because I've driven in some towns where the flags are huge. They're bigger than the buildings there. They fly above.
One could. I haven't proposed anything like that. Often it's limited, as a practical matter, they're limited by the size of the flagpole. One provision in this draft would limit flagpole sizes to the maximum that's allowed in the particular zone. So in, like most commercial zones, that would be 45 feet. And I should make clear that that contradicts another part of the zoning ordinance. It says flagpoles, among other things that aren't used for habitation, can exceed the maximum height limit. So a decision has to be made which way you want to go on those. But for instance, if you have a 80-foot flagpole, presumably you could have a flag that measures 40 feet or something if it can stand up to the wind. So.
And there isn't a limitation in like residential areas for the height of a flagpole someone might want to put in their
There is not.
yard?
Not now, there is not.
Wow.
Doug, did you have a question?
I just, and Richard, you're aware of the issue they had in Florida with Trump and Mar-a-Lago and the homeowners association with the size of the flag that he put up and the court expense that incurred while they tried to regulate that?
I'm not aware of it, but
Well, the gist of it was he put up a flag that was 10 times bigger than what was quite a lot larger than what was accustomed to the area. And then the neighborhood associations complained because of the distraction that it created and the blocking of the view that it created.
They're also in a residential area, if they're too large.
Miles, please use your microphone.
They are noisy when the wind blows, and that is a consideration I think you should contemplate.
Maybe one solution to that problem would be the height of the flagpole can be no greater than the height in that particular zone for the building height.
that's what
Yeah.
this proposes.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what is in here?
That's what's in here. Yeah.
Good, okay.
And what about the number of flagpoles?
The proposal in here is that a residential property, a residential lot could have 2, and a commercial could have 3.
And is there anything proposing safety distance from power lines or
No,
going across the road if the wind blows it down?
no, there's nothing proposed on that. I don't know if there's any code issues with that. But no. I know we have a very tall flagpole in the city that I'm sure if it fell would fall across 101 and hit the
If not
power
both sides.
poles on the other side of the street.
To me, that's a problem. Because the likelihood of a high wind storm here is pretty solid. Although they don't fly a flag on that pole anymore that I've seen in a long
But
time.
one thing is, a flagpole, in a residential area, a flagpole up to 25 feet does not need a building permit. Beyond that, it does. And I'm not sure what the rule is in commercial zones, but a substantial size flagpole needs a building permit. And that's going to, I believe those factor in the wind loading if you're flying a flag on them.
Well, maybe we should apply that to the residential too, just so that,
Speaking of your,
I thought it was. Maybe we should apply that to the residential as well, just,
Well, that's a building code issue. And like I said, up to 25 feet doesn't need a building permit, and beyond that, it does.
but not everybody's engineering skills are equal. And leaving that up to everybody seems, not that I see a lot of flagpoles blowing over anywhere, but it just seems like that would be silly just to leave out there.
I remember the city taking down the flag at the Regatta Park when the wind started getting really high winds where it would tatter the flag.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, moving along, we have a definition of flashing sign,
Mhm.
and it's just principally grammatical changes. One thing you've seen, you have before you the comment that we got from ODOT
Yeah.
about, we say that the displays can change by dissolve, fade, or by instantaneous change, and they would like that to just be instantaneous, not by dissolve or fade. So we can make that change if you want.
I think we should, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I'm skipping over things that are just
Fine.
grammatical changes, or rewording with the same meaning, but making it make sense a little more. So I'm going to go right to garage sale signs, where it appears we've struck out most of the definition. The reason for that is the definition in this case is the standard for garage sale signs. So we move that standard elsewhere so that you just have a definition and not a standard. So that if you're looking for what are the standards for garage sale signs, you might not think you should look at the definition of what is a garage sale sign.
So the garage sale sign is at the garage sale. Is it legal to have a garage sale sign out on the street directing people to the garage sale? Is that covered someplace else?
It is covered someplace else. But the idea of putting garage sale signs on the telephone pole or down at the corner in the public right-of-way, those are all illegal, and they always have been.
Ah, okay. Okay.
I would say always have, but they have been since the sign code was adopted in the 90s.
So it's just an enforcement issue then?
Right.
Is there a penalty for that enforcement?
Well, technically, I think it's a Class B violation, which is the maximum fine, I think, is $1,000, and the presumptive fine is $265. So,
Have we ever fined anybody?
I don't recall any necessarily, but that doesn't mean that we haven't. I know that in the past we've gone out and just picked up the signs.
Does code enforcement work on the weekends when they most appear?
I can't answer that. I don't know
It might
for
be a
sure.
good idea when we have our weekend garage sale event that the organization that sponsors that makes very clear to people what the sign regulation is and how they might be in violation of it. Yeah.
Can I go back just one step? Freestanding sign, does that include banners? Are they a freestanding sign?
Not if they're
technically, they
attached
have
to
to
a
be
building
attached
or a
to something.
structure.
Well, they're not typically, they're usually on some
You're
sort
talking
of
about those like
stand.
feather banners?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, yes, then that could be a freestanding sign, something for which you could get a permit if you met the requirements for.
so you might want to include banners under the last sentence, freestanding signs include.
Well, it would be
Ground
it would be a
signs.
pole sign, because it's on a pole.
Okay.
Okay, let's keep moving forward here.
Okay, then we add a definition for government sign, which replaces traffic or municipal sign, and it's a little bit broader, a little bit more explicit of what constitutes a sign that is exempted from the sign permit requirements. So it says that it can be basically any government agency, the way it's written now, which could include even the urban renewal agency, the fire district, the school district, the water improvement district, any municipality or governmental organization would be included within the definition of government sign.
Local government, okay.
Government, local government, state government, federal government.
That's fine, yeah.
We've amended the ground sign definition for clarity, just that it's on the ground and not on a pole. So a monument sign is another way that ground sign is referred to. An illuminated sign is amended, and it includes a distinction between internally illuminated and externally illuminated signs. And just making that clear. And then there's photos illustrating what those are. So there's the sign here that says boutique is a backlighted sign. The diner sign is a neon type sign, and the others have just sign cabinets with light inside of them. And what I've tried to do with the externally illuminated signs, I put arrows in showing where the lights are, so showing that they're shining on the sign and don't come from within the sign. And we add a definition for inflatable sign, because we didn't address those before. So these would be examples of inflatable signs. The gorilla is the only one that I took that picture, so that one's going to stay in. I'm trying to find a good picture of the tube with the flopping arms, with the blowers that keep them going. And we eliminate the definition of mall because we don't use that term, and also the way it's written doesn't describe anything that actually exists in Lincoln City or is likely to, because that's basically an enclosed shopping mall.
Richard, on that one, I kind of think that the Lincoln City Mall falls under the definition of a mall.
It may fall under the generally accepted definition of a mall, but doesn't fall under this definition of a mall, because this talks about it being enclosed.
So you're foreseeing that in the future, we're not going to have an enclosed mall?
No, I don't foresee that at all. In fact, what I'm seeing is with the rise of e-commerce, nationwide, the closed malls they're closing left and right. There's fewer and fewer of them, and so I don't see anything like that coming here.
Well, let's look at hypothetically then, if Fred Meyers was to purchase the Lighthouse Center and put up a complex, and they had kiosks for Starbucks, coffee, hair salons, that was all interconnected from internally inside the building. A bank be another example. Would that be classified as an internal mall?
I wouldn't think of it as that, because basically I think what they do is essentially give what amounts to a franchise to operate within their store. They're very limited. It's a Fred Meyer store, and they have, the Washington Federal and a eyeglasses place and those kinds of things inside there. But I wouldn't think of that as a mall.
Do we have regulations that are specific to malls?
No.
So
it's
that's
not-
one
no.
reason to eliminate
It's not
it,
an
I
issue.
guess.
So then moving along, the memorial signs or tablets is just eliminated. That's a kind of sign we would allow based on its content. And so instead of having that content-based distinction, it's just, you know, if you want that kind of sign, you can get a sign permit for a sign, not a memorial sign, but a sign. And motel unit signs is the one that's replaced with address signs. Added a definition for moving sign to distinguish it from a flashing sign, because we have some exceptions to the prohibition on flashing signs, you know, but we want to make sure those don't apply to moving signs, which
Would a
are also
moving
prohibited.
sign, would a moving sign include a balloon?
Only when the wind blows. Yeah.
Yeah.
Swing or otherwise attract attention through movement.
Do we have a limitation on the amount of flag or feather signs, as you referred to them, on a piece of property?
Well, what I would say is what this code would do would say they get treated like any other sign. So if you have, say, a 50-foot wide lot, you're allowed one 50-foot, square foot sign, pole sign or whatever. Well, you can choose to have it be one of those feather banners, or you can choose to have it be something else.
So could you explain to me the kite store down by the D River that has a multi of those feather signs out front, and let alone, you know, the attachments they have to their building?
There's a very significant issue there. And that's one of the issues there. The other issue is we prohibit outdoor display of merchandise. And so that's something else that the code needs to address, that context, where in some circumstances, some things need to be loosened up on that, but I would say that having, you know, 5 or 10 of those out there, certainly if this was adopted the way it's proposed, they would be prohibited.
What if it's one of those businesses that has 50 feet of frontage, but there's 5 businesses in there? So you only get one,
Get one sign,
you get one sign for the property.
one freestanding sign. Now, as far as attached signage, each business could have, assuming that none of them have 25 linear feet of frontage open to the public, each one of them could have up to 25 square feet of attached signage.
What if we, I don't know what everybody else might think about this, but just to throw it out there, what if places like that can only have one of many businesses represented out front not have that option at all? So there's just the attached signage and one freestanding sign that typically lists all of the businesses in said building. Is that?
I'm not sure what you're saying. I think that's what's allowed right now. I'm not sure what you're.
Well, I'm saying, like, so if there is this property that has 50 feet of frontage, you allow one sign for 5 businesses. A feather, I'm talking about the feather ones, not the freestanding signage that typically represents everybody in there. Why not just get rid of the one A-frame sign, feather banner, instead of only one person maybe getting lucky to have that and then nobody else does?
Well, if the property owner has to sign the application for a sign permit, so if they've got 5 tenants, it's their issue of deciding how available signage gets divided up. And that's not a city issue, that's a landlord-tenant issue. Now, the way this is written, the feather banner would be treated like any other freestanding sign.
So they wouldn't be able to have a feather banner
and
a freestanding
right.
sign, so that would, okay.
Right. Now, if they had, what is it, you need 200 feet in order to get a second sign?
Need more than 200.
More than 200 feet. If you have more than 200 feet of frontage, you get one 100 square foot sign, and then another sign that would be half of your linear frontage. That's, the square footage you're allowed would be half of the amount of linear frontage over 200 feet?
Yeah. So,
So-
for example, if you had 250 feet, the excess over 200 is 50, so you get 1 square foot for every 2 feet over the 200. So you'd get another sign that's 25 square feet. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
So is for the purposes of defining a sign on a building, if the name of the business is painted on the building, is that considered a sign?
That's a sign.
Okay.
Yes. Let's see. Place sign, the definition is eliminated. That would be covered either by government sign or just by being treated as any other sign, not based on what it says. We have a definition of pole sign, and also amended the definition of portable sign, which had a very long name, but just said that there's a portable sign, it's A-frame signs, swinger signs, and similar signs, and then we'll have illustrations of them. There's a couple there. Eliminated the portable temporary attraction signboard definition, because that term is never used in the ordinance. Added definition of print, just to make it clear that there's that printing isn't just, like a printing press or something. There's a lot of different ways to do what's called printing, or what we're calling printing. We add a definition for, well, actually, we should say real estate sign. Took out the content-based aspect of that definition. It's just a sign that you can have up while the property is being offered for sale or lease. We're not saying what it has to say.
It says temporary. How long-
Right.
But that's an indefinite temporary?
Well,
'Cause there's some property that's had signs on it for years.
there's a property I know of that's been on for 20 years.
Does it have a sign on it?
So we need to define in good faith.
Yeah.
We also have the council adopted an ordinance on temporary signage almost a month ago. So it'll be effective in a couple days. And this, what was formerly real estate sign, is now one temporary sign placed outside. I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. A single temporary sign placed outside during the period of time a real property is being marketed in good faith for sale or lease. Such sign shall not exceed 8 square feet in sign face area when located on a residential property as defined in Title 17, and 32 square feet in sign face area when located on a commercial property as defined in Title 17. Such signage may be erected beginning the day the property is offered for sale or lease and must be removed within 10 business days after the property sale or lease is completed. There is no restriction on the content of such sign. However, such signs shall also conform to all general standards. So during the time the property is offered for sale or lease is the only restriction. And the sign doesn't have to be for sale. It could have any content.
Could be Pepsi.
It could say, "I like beer." So,
Okay, so.
We added a definition called residence sign to replace the nameplate definition.
Is there a size limitation on that sign?
Yes,
But it's not here.
not here, it's in the standards, not in the definitions.
Okay.
And then under sign repair, there's a term we were proposing to add for clarity, but we're also recommending, if you follow our recommendation on non-conforming signs, you not include this piece that we're adding for clarity. And that is that in the case of non-conforming signs, you can replace the structural members with materials that are identical to what's being replaced. So it would be, you know, if it's a wood 4x4, you can replace it with a wood 4x4. If it's a steel 6-inch pipe, then that's what you can replace it with, not something different. But again, I would not include this if you adopt or recommend adopting the non-conforming sign provisions that we'll get
Yeah,
to later.
it's
All
not-
right.
It's not consistent.
Then the definition of temporary political signs is changed to temporary election time signs, and eliminates content-based requirements for that. And more of what Mr. Apicello described as in the ordinance that was adopted last month, it relates to this as well. So.
And beer.
All right.
Definition of traffic or municipal signs is eliminated, and we replace that with government signs, as I mentioned before. Wall sign is amended. That's where you asked about being, if it's something's painted on the wall, is it a sign? Yes, it is, and I think that's made clear here.
If you paint a flag on a building, is that considered a sign, or is that?
No, that's a mural.
Might be a mural, might be a sign. Yeah, you know, there's
It's a free speech issue.
there's a million pitfalls in all this stuff, and but a flag, as it's defined, is something cloth or flexible. So if you're painting a flag on the building, chances are it's a sign.
You know, Richard, we have a sentence here saying that a wall sign must not project above the top of the wall or beyond the end of the building. I was wondering if we might want to use parallel language to say a flag cannot project over the edge of the property line. So it's got to be contained, it's got to be unfurled within the property. It can't go over the edge of the property.
So the pole would have to be set back far enough that the flag itself does
Correct.
not cross the property
Correct.
line. That's a possibility.
Kind of a way around going. Good work.
And we added a definition of window sign. Just to try to be clear, and again, this comes largely from the model code. Okay. And that's the definitions. Now we get to the substance. So, this part in green here is just, I've tried every way I could think of to get rid of that, to delete it, and it wouldn't delete, so it's just sitting there. But it's repeated elsewhere, so. And the two provisions on the top of the page here, we're on page 11. Those are moved to the exempt signs below. Then on the next part, which is now part B, beginning on line 7, it's changed it a little bit for clarity, but also where we, in B2, where we say the reason for the sign, we want to take that out because we don't care what the reason for the sign is. We're not allowed to care what the reason for the sign is. It's, we don't want them to say, well, that's a good reason for a sign. You can have that sign. And it's a bad reason you can't have it. That's not our job. And where it says description of the copy, we don't care what the sign says. We just want to know what area is going to be used for the copy. Then I told you about the green stuff up above. That's the beginning on line 15 is where that reappears. One thing in there in C3 there, talking about signs having an irregular shape. You can measure it by having a rectangle that completely encloses the sign and is 4 inches from any portion of the sign's message. Question whether you want to keep that 4 inches around the sign. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, Kate.
I think we talked about the, oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
the problem with that is that it can add so much square footage that really isn't square footage of a sign, that someone may not even be able to propose anything near the sign that they want if they have to add this imaginary 4-inch border. So, and it doesn't really reflect the kind of signs that are put up now this was put in the code probably in 1994. And the signs that you typically see now are the ones, if you look over at the Lincoln City Outlet Mall, where they're all kind of on raceways with channel letters. It's just a different type of signage that we see now than was the cabinet signs that were more common back in the 90s. So I'm not really sure what the people who wrote this into the code back in the 90s, I'm not sure what they were hoping to accomplish by this, but it doesn't seem like the best approach.
So deleting that after eliminating and is 4 inches from any portion of the sign's message, would that work?
That would work for me.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. What about everybody
Yeah,
else?
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because what happens, like if you get like a sign painted on the wall, you got to go 4 inches around it all the way around, and so it really reduces the size of the copy that's allowed. And that can be, depending on how the sign is laid out, that can be really significant in someone being able to have an effective message.
Well, that'll work. Good. Okay.
Let's see. On page 12 of the sign identification, we have the ordinance as is written now requires people to have a sign number on their sign, and we haven't given out sign numbers in years because the way signs are now, in many cases, it's not practical to put a sign number on them. So
Are sign permits supposed to be displayed somewhere public?
no.
No? Maybe that would be helpful. I don't know.
I don't know that it would
Kind of an
accomplish
annoyance, but-
anything. We have a good inventory of signs, and actually we have good photographic inventories of signs in the past. Every once in a while we get someone who comes in and says, well, that sign's been there since 1963. Well, we actually happen to have photos of every sign that existed in the 70s and another time in around 2000, 2001?
We did one about, yeah, we did one about 10 years ago. It's been almost 10 years now.
So, and when someone puts up a new sign, it's pretty obvious to the staff when we know, did we give a permit for that sign?
Right. It is a small one-row town.
Then we get into the list of exempt signs. We added address signs, and that's the ones that we say are necessary for first responders. We presently have an allowance for construction signs, which is up to 32 square feet on a property that's under construction, where there's construction going on. And the question staff is raising, do we need to keep that? Is it a good idea to keep that? Basically, what it does is, typically, it's not required to, but typically what it says is who's doing the construction. Or could say anything right now. Could say, I like beer. The question is whether you think it's a good idea to keep that allowance for those signs. Then directional signs, we limit it to no more than one at a parking lot entrance, no more than 2.5 feet in height, no more than 6 square feet in area. The height and area are in the existing code. The limitation of only one and only at a parking lot entrance is new. And flags, you'd be exempt 2 flags per residential lot, 3 per commercial. And this says you can't have flagpole higher than what the underlying zone allows.
Quick question. Do nautical flags count? They are a much smaller dimension and could possibly be considered a banner, but
They don't fall, it would not fall within the exemption of a sign, of a flag, the way the flag is defined here. So
So I would need to get a permit for some nautical flags at my house, as well as, so I'm
if you
flying
had,
the American
the letter
flag.
signs where, it's this, like the Navy uses on.
Yeah, well, they also make those, for POW flags, and, I mean, they come in a large.
Yeah, the
array of
POW
selection.
flags typically would meet the definition of a flag, and it would be exempt.
But I'm saying they do make those in the small nautical sizes, so, I mean, you could run 10 of those up there if they're not included anywhere. I don't see them mentioned anywhere as a flag or a banner.
Or is there a
Well,
limit to how many flags on a flagpole?
Well, we say
That too.
2 flags.
Per flagpole or per?
Flags, up to 2 per lot in a residential zone. It doesn't say flag
You could have
poles,
2 flagpoles.
But a limit of 2 flags, so there's
but you
no-
only get 2 flags.
so you
the
could
way
have
this is
one
written.
flag per pole, but.
1 flag per
that's it.
pole, or 2 flags on one
On
pole.
one pole.
So I guess it
Or
does
presumably you
limit.
could have 10
Okay,
poles,
got it.
and
No, I
but
got it.
only 2 flags.
Got it.
What about like storm warning flags? Does that fall into these definitions?
Talking about the official storm warning flags, those are exempt because those would be government signs, assuming that they're, that they're not flags, but actually meet the definition of a government sign. If it's not the Coast Guard putting it, if you just want to do it because you're repeating what the Coast Guard says or the Weather Service says, then that would typically be, whether it would meet the definition of a flag, but it meets the size, the proportion standards, then it's a flag, and it's exempt. If it doesn't, then it may be a sign. Do you put up storm warning flags? Just curious, I don't.
No, but I could see, for example, the hotel down by the D-side way station might decide to put up storm warning signs, and that might give people an indication that they might not want to go out into the surf at the D River station because of potential hazards with storm events.
There are volunteer NOAA weather watchers that put up
Yeah.
signs, flags.
I'm getting a little concerned about time. We're not just halfway through this, and we have people here this evening who want to talk about this. So
Okay.
how can we move through this a little bit?
Well, we're really in the meat of it right now, and I think I'm hoping that I can get through it relatively quickly from here. We've got the next, provision is about garage sale, yard sales, and so on. You get one sign of no more than 4 square feet, and one directional sign on private property of more than 2 square feet.
Would it make sense if we just go through it by where some of us may have questions about what's in the remainder of your report? Or is there something, a
I've
couple of
only
things
got
you
like
really want to...
six more things in here that I want to cover for
I
sure.
have
I'll
10
try
more
to,
questions.
Okay.
The highlights, Commissioner Crone asked about limitations on the size of residential signs, and here's no more than 2
Here it
square
is,
feet.
got it.
Real estate signs are exempted, subject to the standards we have elsewhere. And the election time signs. We exempt signs required by government agencies, so this was originally, one of the things we were thinking of was the signs that are or were required for VRDs. I don't think they're required anymore.
VRDs, they still are, aren't they?
No, that ordinance was 3-3, and so nothing happened.
Nothing happened, okay, so then those are still required, so we wanted to make sure those were exempt. Temporary signs, one thing on here, we noticed that this doesn't say, this needs work. It doesn't say for how long or what size or under what circumstances you're allowed a temporary sign. So it needs a little more work, and I think the intent is that this be, like I mentioned, if you've got your permanent sign on order, you can put up a temporary sign of the size that you would be allowed if it was your permanent sign, or if you have unused available signage, you could get temporary signage, no more than 2 per year. So anyway, this probably needs a little bit of work. Then the prohibited signs, flashing signs, and then we have limitations on the prohibition, if they're fully within the building, and if they're not observable from outside. Then we also prohibit moving signs. Actually, this needs work on they need to be re-lettered, but the second, or actually the first C, signs on natural objects. You used to just say signs on trees, but I wanted to make it explicit that you can't go out and chisel some rock somewhere and put up your sign. Now, that's when it's in its natural place. In other words, you could go out and get a boulder and chisel it and make that your sign, but we just didn't want it to be you can go out and deface natural features for signage.
You skipped over obscene signs.
Right.
The definition there is only concerned with sex, but do obscene signs include hate signs, bigot signs?
That's a Supreme Court issue, I think.
So the way we handled this a month ago with the council is we basically said that signs that are prohibited by state law, and so, I'm sorry, so if it's illegal under state law, it depicts, things that are prohibited. There's like display of certain sexual things in front of children and those kind of things. So we just kind of incorporated the state's prohibitions on what you would call obscenity, and we did not include this definition of obscenity because of the content-based argument. As you know, in Oregon, we have not just the First Amendment free expression under the U.S. Constitution, but we have the Oregon Constitution's protection of free expression, which goes further than the U.S. Constitution. So nude dancing, for example, is protected expression in Oregon, as is the Cianelli case. Was it live sex shows were considered to be protected expression. So an obscenity standard is going to be difficult content-based regulation. So what we kind of did was say, if the state criminal law says it's illegal to display certain things to a child, then that's illegal.
So does the state law cover things like swastikas?
Well, most things that people would find offensive are protected as expression. So if you want to offend your neighbors, sometimes that's exactly your intent. You may
So a commercial business could put up a sign with basically what most people would consider hate messages, and that's protected.
The free expression provisions, especially in Oregon, would protect things that most of us would find offensive.
Okay.
And so this obscene sign language is pretty old, and I'm not sure that it's been carried forward in the model sign code. We could talk about that. But
I'd have to look on that, but we may need to change that. Then we added a number of new prohibited signs, inflatable signs, pennant strings and streamers, and this is if you want to add balloons in general, you could add that there. Signs that emit smoke and so on, signs that prevent free ingress or egress from door or windows, reflective signs and balloon signs. One thing that we did not put in here we may want to consider is, I guess I could call it projected signs. You may have seen that people are doing that. Basically, it's like a slide projector, putting it up on the side of a building. I would recommend that we put in something on that.
So the little projections that you can buy that put snowflakes on your house at Christmas time would be banned?
That would be one example. There'd be a lot of many others, I'm sure. Holiday decorations, you get into some issues there.
Okay. I'm just trying to make sure we leave enough breadcrumbs in here so that there isn't a lot of people standing at the planning commission desk.
Right, no, I understand.
The council did add provision, again, it's content neutral. So the International Municipal Lawyers had recommended that between, I think they had December 1 and January 15th or something like that, that you would be allowed to have additional temporary signs, which could be illuminated and flashing, and that clearly has to do with
Holiday stuff.
lights, yeah, and it could include messages. And so what the council did was, actually, I think Richard had suggested some dates, and I think they stuck with the dates that Richard had suggested. We made it a little longer than what the International Municipal Lawyers would allow. And so they actually put into the code that there is an allowance for an exemption for a period of time. I think I have it around here somewhere, but for this kind of temporary signage, including flashing, and it's of course, it doesn't have to say Happy Holidays. It could say,
I like
beer.
Which I'm going to do this year.
Yeah, it's a risk you run when you, when I was asked about this, it was like, look, you are balancing, the character of the neighborhood and your community and aesthetics against free expression. So we may turn out next year, we may decide that, you know what, we want to err on the side of character of the community, and we may get tighter with this. We might pull it in, but the council did address that.
And the next section is on conditions and standards. As we took a lot of things from the definitions and put them in here so you knew where the standards are. There's a lot of grammatical changes, but no changes to the, with a couple of exceptions that I'll get to the number or size of signs that people are allowed now.
Are there signs in town now that don't currently meet these standards?
Oh, yeah, there's
Oh,
lots
yeah.
of them.
Okay.
Um, One thing on page 17, talking about portable signs, number 2D on line 15 and 16, we say that these portable signs can't be supplemented with balloons, flags, ribbons, streamers, or other attachments. Typically, those are the things that smack you in the face when you walk by them or whatever. And sort of a note to myself is, would you want to extend that prohibition to all signs? Where you couldn't have a 100-square-foot sign and then tack a whole bunch of balloons on it and streamers and so on, so. Propose at the bottom of page 17, going on to page 18, the current code has a provision allowing for additional temporary banner signs of up to 50 square feet. Now that was, we added that to the code during the recession, with the idea of just giving businesses a break to do more advertising, try to draw in more business or whatever. The proposal is to take that out. It was never intended to be permanent. It was to try to provide some recession relief, and the recession's long over, and the recommendation from staff is to take that out. Then going on the next page, there is a list of the kinds of signs that are allowed in residential zones beginning on line 14, and we're just adding the two new zones in there, the R1 RE zone, the Roads End zone, and the VR, the vacation rental zone. And then at the bottom of this page 18, talking about protrusion of a sign over a street or alley or public property, we're proposing to add language. Right now it says you can't have anything hanging over the right-of-way of 101. We want to add language that says unless you got permission from ODOT or the city with the permission of ODOT. Because one thing we're looking at is for the city to take over administration of the sidewalks on Highway 101. And actually, we would like to have signs over the sidewalk, 8.5 feet up or something, pedestrian-oriented signs. So when you're walking down the sidewalk, you can see under the overhangs or whatever what the businesses are.
There are those.
There are a number of them now. I would say right now they don't meet the letter of state law, and maybe not our municipal law, but we just want to legitimize those through this. And then non-conforming signs. There's the existing provisions with, if you want to keep the existing provisions, we suggest a number of changes, but we recommend an alternative which would essentially mean that as non-conforming signs are badly damaged, they would go away over time rather than be able to be constantly repaired and never go away, never come into conformance. So we always have some signs that are not in conformance, and that some people may feel are given unfair advantage to people that have those versus the people that are complying with the current law.
I think comparing the two of them, I like the alternative. And how do other commissioners feel about that?
I like the alternative.
The alternative,
Non-conforming signs provision.
the alternative being that they would eventually gradually be brought into compliance?
Well, the language that begins on page 2116, that be used instead of the language on 20, line
Right,
22.
okay, yeah. No, I agree with that.
That's all I have.
That's it? All right, thank you, Richard. Does the commission have any questions, more questions for you? All right, now's the time for public comment and testimony. And I have the sign-up sheet here, and please, I apologize if I mispronounce your name. When you come up, just give us your name, don't tell us what your address is, and hold the microphone right in front of your mouth so we can hear you clearly, and our listening audience can too. And the first on my list, I think, is the Wind-Driven Family. Is that correct? All right. So you will have 3 minutes for both of you, I guess. Are you testifying together? Or, yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. Good. Welcome.
Does most of the talking,
Yeah. Thanks
right?
for coming.
Well,
Thank you.
first of all, thank you for having us. Good evening. We are, sorry, thank you.
You can pull that towards you.
Even
There you
better,
go.
thank you. So basically, we are a small family-owned business. We're wind-driven, right there in the downtown Ocean Lake area. We're the other kite store in town. You spoke earlier about the one down by DRD Sands and the flag bedders and such. I guess my only question or concern would be, as a small family-run business, our entire advertising budget, more or less, goes into putting flags and banners and windsocks and things on Highway 101. Thousands upon thousands of people drive through here every day, and that's how we make our living. Some of these rules, I guess, that are potentially being proposed could destroy our entire advertising, more or less. So now there's a few things, like the flag banners. Now, you talked about the big feather banners. The ones we actually show are just big, beautiful ones, multicolored one, no real signage, no real messages, no anything like that, just big, beautiful, decorative banners. Is that something that's included in no longer being able to use? Excuse me.
I don't have a certain answer for that.
Okay.
We're having a discussion on that. If it doesn't have, if it's just, a purple banner or has a pretty design on it, is it a sign? I mean, we're getting into whether there's content or not. So there's a issue we have to work out and suggest.
Okay. Because a sign, in my understanding, would denote a message of some form, correct?
We can't look at that anymore.
Okay, okay.
It's hard.
Yeah,
It is.
It's really
that's
hard.
a wide open question.
Yeah.
I guess ours is decorative, colorful. There's no messages, there's no words, there's no hidden meetings or agendas. It's just big, beautiful banners. We only put up 2, and we put them up every morning, and we take them down every afternoon.
You have 2, was that correct?
2,
Well,
yes, sir.
Except when I'm there.
And they're also
then I
on
have
private
more.
property on our side of the sidewalk. So now I guess my question is this something that will no longer be allowed?
Richard, did you mention at one point that there's some provision in the code restricting the advertising of goods that are
Merchandise.
for sale?
Merchandise, yeah.
Merchandise for sale, so is that, are you
There's-
actually putting banners out that you can go into your store and buy?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes.
There is a prohibition in the code on outdoor display of merchandise.
Okay.
We've tried to do sort of a common sense application of that. But
I've got something for you. There's something I've thought about with these little flags and banners that I see at your guys' place and the other one as well. Would an option for you to put one at other businesses that says your business name on it down there, and maybe you provide this as an eye catcher for another business, but then you also get to advertise yourself without breaking any of the rules?
I think that would be up to the other business, whether or not they want to.
Obviously, but that's something you could negotiate with many other people who wouldn't maybe mind getting a permit to have one of these out there if you provided that to them in a way. I understand if you're already investing, you've already got several that you've invested the money in for advertising. Why not put your name on them and put them at another business down the street if they can get a permit for it, and then it's double duty.
But if
You
you're
bring
u-
advertisement to another business, and then they go, ooh, what's this little thing? And then the people who have this business, maybe they really like it, and they tell everybody else about you.
Which we do anyway. There are people in the community that own businesses that come to us for their display items.
Sure.
Because, I mean, it's the ocean. People come to the beach for funky, kind of. But at the same time, you're relying or hoping to rely on their acceptance of you utilizing their advertisements, whatever. If it's considered a sign, you're kind of encroaching on their rights too, or their usage of signage. So, and to me, it was the definition of things that I'm still not really sure of, because we know what a flag is, we know what a banner is, we know what a windsock is, we know what, and to us, those definitions are absolute. So how you place them in your addendums or however what you want to put forth for us to abide by is what is kind of confusing. And so that was one of the reasons why we came here tonight. And I wasn't really even sure. I just thought it was a sign-up thing. We were going to be nice and let you know who we were. But I'm not really sure yet where we stand in accordance with where your definitions are going. And so that's why we came, because we want to hear what your opinion is and what your reasoning would be behind that. I can understand the safety for sure. And in Ocean Lake, it's so narrow there that anything is a distraction to people driving through there. It's nasty. I would love to see flashing lights on every crosswalk because we hear the brakes every day.
Every day.
So we want to comply with that, and yet we always have that nice little berm right there that's like, oh, let's put some colorful things out there. Well, I can understand where that would be another distraction. So we want to know how you want us to proceed. And I guess what you guys come down with is where we'll
Well,
go.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for the extra time.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And next is David Imama. Imami, okay.
Yes, David Imami. I'm the managing agent of
Could you hold the microphone closer to your mouth, please? Thank you.
Lighthouse Square. Yep. Once President Bush says, change for the sake of a change is only bring a change in your pocket. And I tell you, this is absolutely change for nothing. These languages are vague. I assisted, we have many centers that we manage, office building. I've assisted City of Tualatin, Lake Oswego, Portland in their writing up their code, sign code. In fact, I did 90% of downtown Tualatin code with a planner. Here, Mr. Townsend knows me, knows my background. No input from business people in this community. They're a good example. Everything in here is always, because we don't have business people promoting this town. This is absolutely anti-business. This sign code, if you're changing it, change it for helping the small businesses, because Safeway is doing fine. Is the first person needs help. You cannot put one sandwich sign in a Lighthouse Square where we have McMinimans, we have Sushi Hunter, we have ice cream shop, we have 60s Cafe, and so on. We can't have one, sandwich sign. They want to take the name of that and put a portable sign. Portable sign is the one that people dance with it in the middle of a street. That's portable sign. The definition is wrong. Of all this definition is wrong. They have mingled definition. As you heard very loudly, Mr. Townsend says many times that we're still working on this. But this is going to go to City Council for approval. This is poorly designed, very little thought went into it. There's no input from business people in this community. Mr. Thousands had never owned a business, and if he had owned, I'd like to know which one was it. I have been 45 years in this business. City of Tualatin and city manager called me to go and sit down with a planner and write their sign code. Because I work in Portland. In Portland, for sandwich sign, you get 1 year permit for $75, and in a street downtown, you can have 6 of them within 50 feet. No problem. As long as you have a little sign and it says what date yours expired, the guy comes in and says, hey, take your sign or go get another year extension. I don't know what is the complexity of this situation, but this needs to be reviewed. This is poorly done. It should not go to City Council. It should not go for any comments unless Mr. Thousand called me and several other people in town and asked their question, their input. This definition is wrong. The entire code is written to destroy small businesses.
Thank you very much for your testimony tonight. Yeah.
Thank you.
Greg Beneke? Okay.
My name's Greg Benke. I just have one question, probably for the city attorney. I understand that it's been determined that by self-admission that the city's sign ordinance is unconstitutional in many areas. My question is this particular changes or amendments that are proposed designed to address those issues?
The city council adopted an amendment to the city code a month ago. We actually proposed it as an emergency ordinance, and the council declined to do it one councilor declined. So the content-based problems with the code have been addressed in that ordinance. It was adopted on the 8th, I believe, so it'll be effective in 2 days. So we removed the primary issues of content-based distinctions in the code with that. And that was primarily to address exempt signs that don't require permits. So pretty much what we're dealing with here is things that require permits through the land development process. You know, when you talk about a monument sign or a ground sign, you need a permit. It has to be fit in with your site plan, through site plan review. It has to be addressed that way. The temporary signs where we had most of the content-based issues have been addressed.
So forgive my ignorance, but in layman's terms, the issues of unconstitutional sign ordinance stuff have been addressed through these verbiage changes and amendments. Is that correct?
Yes, but this is a coordinated effort, okay? What we did was adopt an ordinance and say this ordinance controls over any inconsistent provision of the code, but we have to get into this code and fix this as well. So this is to make them consistent. But the issues have been, there's a conflict provision in the ordinance that was adopted and says if there's any conflict, it's the new ordinance that controls, not this ordinance. But we still need to clean this up.
So would I be safe to assume that the council is going to vote on this, but it still needs to be cleaned up?
No, this is a land development code provision. It goes to the Planning Commission for a recommendation, and then it goes on to the City Council when the Planning Commission has finished reviewing it. That may or may not happen today.
We're not done yet.
And there will be another public hearing before the city council when
Yes.
that happens.
So, but what we did was, because we had people coming up and saying, your code is unconstitutional, we addressed the issues which we thought were the most obvious that needed to be fixed.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Tina Puckett? Welcome.
Yes, thank you for allowing me here today. I just moved into the area last week and realized that these sign coatings were happening after I came here and applied for my business license. And I have several concerns. I didn't understand, we didn't go over the roof signs, and I can't understand if if there actually are additional signs allowed on the roof, or apparently that was just a definition of what a roof sign would be, but apparently they're not allowed.
Are they allowed, Richard?
No.
No, okay.
Okay. But kites and windsocks are allowed. So maybe instead of getting a Portland Soundwind flag, which, is that a flag or is that a banner? If that is deemed that we can't do that, that would be like what Wind Driven has out front. Then perhaps I can put a flag on a flag, or a kite on a flagpole instead, or a windsock. They're allowed, right? Because it says they're exempt, the kites and the windsocks are exempt, which would make sense since this whole city, I thought, was all about colorful flags and windsocks and things like that. So I feel like the same as these gentlemen, that this is poorly worded and possibly unconstitutional, because in the Constitution it says that we're allowed to do business in the United States of America. And moving here, I'm very discouraged at this very moment, because I'm worried about my business not being able to draw people in, because I've always been, I sell tie-dyed clothing, and I've always put kites, windsocks, banners, if you will, colorful sarongs outside, and that's how I draw people in. That is my advertisement budget as well, and it would devastate my business if some of these things were passed. And thank you very much.
Thank you. And Michael and Jackie, I can't read. Oswald.
Thank you very much for letting us speak. I'm mostly going to address the banner, definition of the banners, and what you're trying to do with the banners. Sounds to me like you're either trying to do one of two things. Most mom and pop stores in this town have no visual way to attract people except with the open signs or the feather banners. So it sounds to me like you're either trying to inhibit their business, or you're trying to make them get a permit, which requires money, and put money into the coffers. I don't quite understand which one you're trying to do. Were you trying to get rid of them? Is that why you were wanting to define them not as a flag anymore? I don't know the purpose of trying to regulate them differently than a flag. Does anybody know why they're doing this? That's a good question, huh?
Mr. Townsend, you are the planning director. You should have an answer for us.
Thank you. I'll give you an answer. I got complaints from a number of people about proliferation of the feather banners and the appearance that it makes in the community. And so the intent is to address that. Where it appeared to people that, and to me for that matter, that people thought there was, because flags were exempted, then anything that was cloth on a stick would be exempted. And I just want to make clear that that's not the case, because that's not the intent of the flag exemption. That ultimately will be a decision of the city council, and we're scheduled to have a hearing at the city council on this on the 26th, and they'll make the final decision on that.
But to allow half-naked mannequins at the sex shop that are obscene,
well, actually,
you won't allow us mom and pop shops to have a feather banner out there. This is how we make our money in the wintertime. If a lot of these shops look dark and closed, If there is nothing out there to show that we are open, we could be potentially losing income. Nobody thinks about that. Us mom and pop shops are what make this town run in the winter and the summer.
So you take our ability to advertise, because advertising is expensive, as everybody knows. So you're trying to either take away our ability to advertise or give you guys money to get a special permit for them.
What is your business?
We're Northwest Winds Kites and Toys.
We're the horrible
Across the
people
street
down
from
here
Bee
at
River Wayside.
the River Wayside,
Thank
that
you.
we obviously seem to be the trouble of everybody.
You know, you're
with
going to
their
stop.
concerns.
Are you going to make them permit the feather banners at the kite festivals now too?
Okay, well, thank you very
That
much.
we support?
Thank you for your testimony tonight. Thank you. Is there any person in the audience who did not sign up but wishes to speak? Please raise your hand. Seeing none. Is there any comment from representatives of public agencies? If there is no further comment, is there a motion to close the public hearing and the record?
Mr. Chair, before you do that, I just want to, I didn't mention early in the presentation, but we did make actually a pretty special effort to reach out to the Chamber of Commerce with this. We've met with their Government Affairs Committee. We've asked on a number of occasions for input from the Chamber of Commerce on these proposed revisions, and we didn't hear from any business owners on them, even though we did this outreach. So I mean, it's great to get input now, but I just wanted to say we didn't do this in the dark, I guess is what I'm trying to
Thank you for
make
that
clear.
clarification. Yeah. All right. Is there a motion to close the public hearing and the record?
I'm wondering if we want to leave it open so that the changes can be made and then brought back to us for our consideration.
That's a possibility. Another possibility would be to close the public hearing and keep the record open. If you keep the record open, how long can we do that?
Well, the code says that when you have a regulation before you, you have 60 days to forward a recommendation to the council, or it goes on to council without your recommendation. So you would have up to 60 days if you wanted to continue it and leave the hearing open, or close the hearing and leave the record open if you wanted to allow for written submissions. If you wanted to have staff work on it and, like you said, make changes and come back, then I would recommend you leave the hearing open. But if you want to just say, okay, we'll be willing to take additional written comment, then you could close the hearing and leave the record open. So
Well, it might make sense from my perspective, maybe to keep the public hearing and the record open so we can make those changes that we discussed tonight and that Richard brought up.
I believe there was a citywide notice on this, and that notice indicated that this would be the date for the Planning Commission and that the council would hear it on the 26th. But that doesn't mean that the council couldn't continue their consideration to a further date.
Steve. Also, I can say that you next meet on the 20th. If you want, depending on the changes you want, you could continue the hearing to the 20th, and we can bring changes back, and then we could.
Well, do you think that would give you the time you need to make these changes?
Yes.
Okay.
And before the city council meets. So.
And to clean this up in a satisfactory manner so that so we don't have more people very unclear. I know, I think once this is all the language is, the old stuff is taken out and it's reprinted in a simple fashion, I think it would be neater.
Both are in the packet. There's the red line version and then
Yes, I understand
clean
that.
version.
But there were also a number of places where you said that it needed work.
Right.
Yes.
The language needed work. So.
Gary, you have a comment?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question of the Oswalds. Is that still possible, since we haven't closed anything?
Mr. Attorney?
Well, the hearings, you haven't closed the hearing, so.
Right. Can you come back up here just a second? And I'm going to want to talk to you too after that, okay? You are banner salesman per se, or are you other thing salesmen that the banners are used for advertisement for?
Well, we do sell the advertisement, or excuse me, the banners.
Okay.
But we also use them to attract attention that we're open. So we
Selling
do both.
other things.
We
And
use it
sell other
as,
things, too.
our advertisement.
Yeah, but we do sell other things also.
Now, I just want to make sure I had that clear in my mind, because I live in that area, and I walk past all of the shops in that area, and I just wanted to know what I was talking about, because I want to talk to the other couple that also, I guess, compete with you somewhat. But thank you.
Okay.
I want to ask you two the same question. Is sales of the banners themselves a large part of your business, or are the banners mainly to advertise the fact that you have those wonderful looking kites that look like little animals flying all over the place?
It's air art, and we're an outdoor store, including the metal art we have inside. I mean, we have a whole array of things, because you have to diversify here on the coast.
Yeah, okay. I guess the reason is because my point that I'm trying to get to is sometimes your banners are used for other places too that I'm not always as wonderfully appreciative of as I am of your facility. So thank you.
Understood, okay.
Thank you.
And Gary, just to follow up on you, I'm thinking about the gallery down in
Yes.
Taft that has all those metal displays out in front. I think we need to keep in mind that type of display too. It's kind of falls into the same category.
Well, it seems to fall under the illegal display of goods for sale.
Yes. Yes, and maybe that needs to be addressed also.
But I have a question for Richard on that. Should that be addressed in this?
No, it's a
Display of
code.
merchandise
Yeah.
outside?
Or in another
Well,
doc-
all this is, and all we advertise this for, is the sign ordinance. The
right.
display of merchandise outside is entirely different.
Separate issue,
Different
right,
code.
right. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so it seems like there's a consensus to continue, keep the public hearing open and the record open to our next meeting. Am I stating that correctly?
Will that be advertised then as well?
No, what you do is just, you'd have a motion and adopt tonight that you're continuing the hearing until the 20th at 6 PM at this place, and that would constitute, that would comply with the law.
May we have a motion in that
I
regard?
would motion that we continue the hearing until the 20th of November.
Is there a second?
Second it?
May we have a roll call, please, Kate?
All right. Schlesinger?
Yes.
Okay. McFarland?
Yes.
Crowan?
Yes.
Cunningham?
Yes.
Bryson?
Yes.
Kier?
Yes.
Griffiths?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you, Richard.
Are there specific changes you want to see? I mean, there are a lot of things were suggested
Yes.
by one person, so I don't, I don't.
The one section on,
A consensus or something, so.
well, you mentioned yourself on page 13, that whole paragraph on what temporary,
Right.
that needs some work, but I don't have specific suggestions for you on that. And then I do have a suggestion on the flagpole and being set back far enough so the flag does not extend outside of the property line.
And the
But
height.
is
And
that,
The height.
And the
being
height.
Restricted to the building.
I guess what I'm asking for is a consensus of the planning commission. I don't want to
Right.
make a change for one person.
No, I agree.
Yeah, I don't have an an objection to any of the changes that were recommended tonight. Does anybody on the commission do?
No.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts, and I don't know where they fall into the classification, but somebody brought up the point about roof signs, and I thought that was kind of interesting because if I was to put a shingle roof on a house, I could basically design it in a way that could send a message. So, and a roof sign could be something that you need to make a clarification on too.
Are they,
Kate, do we prohibit them across the board or just in Ocean Lake or what?
We don't really prohibit them. We
Okay.
have, there is a section in the code that talks about roof signs, and it talks about how high above the roof they can be. I'm looking for that section right now.
But what about something if I design into my shingles that I put on the roof?
That I don't know. I mean, if it's a residence, residences are limited to 2 square feet of signage anyway. But if we're talking about a commercial building, so we talk about roof signs, and what we're really talking about is, it says no roof sign may extend more than 6 feet above a flat roof. This is on page 15 at the bottom. May extend more than 6 feet above a flat roof or the ridge of a pitched roof, and in no case may the combined height of the building and sign exceed the building height limitations of this title. Now, as a practical matter, a lot of people don't do roof signs because they generally involve structural engineering for wind loads, and so they kind of avoid them in most cases anyway.
But they're not prohibited.
They're not prohibited.
They're just real expensive.
Yeah.
but they're not currently prohibited, right?
They're not prohibited in this, in any of these changes.
Then I guess I misspoke, but I thought we had a,
That may conflict with the new definition of what an attached sign is, though, now that we've gone over the definitions. If we go back to, or wall signage, whatever the definition is.
Well, another point to consider too, and I'm just thinking off the cuff here, but if you've driven on Highway 18 and you've passed the casino going in town, and you've looked to the south, you'll see a big smiley face up on the hill that somebody is...
At some times of the year.
Exactly. But in a sense, that could be a sign. So I could foresee where somebody could plant a garden and out in the front of their property, and that design of that garden could send an advertising type of message or a signage type of message. So there's some other roads, and you know people are going to look for different roads to drive down to try to circumvent what they see as inhibiting. And some things we need to reconsider on these things. So I'm just throwing that out there as a comment.
Like what, for reconsideration?
Well, I mean, you know, if I could form a garden in the front of my property that was on a slope, and in that slope, I could develop a sign that made for an attraction. Is that a message sign? I mean, how do we classify that? If it's drawing attention, I'm stretching. But
I think that might be covered by a sign on the side of a building, that a sign in your garden is parallel to that in concept.
We'll take a look at that.
Huh?
You could
Thanks.
plant beer cans.
Yeah.
All right, any other comments, Gary?
Well, yeah, I have one too, because he asked, what are you talking about reconsidering some of that? And you know, I don't, maybe I'm old here or stupid or something, but I don't see all of the ordinances against signage as being positive, okay? Because I've seen some things that we call signs now here, ordinance on those kites and stuff that I see out there, and they're quite attractive and they're quite pretty and they're really nice to have. I mean, because some of them look like birds. I mean, you know, you're there and that's a bird. I mean, when you're walking down that sidewalk, it's a nice part of town. It's pleasant to walk by that. It's not negative, and it's not something that I want to prohibit necessarily. But apparently it has been prohibited in the past, and because it's displaying merchandise that you're selling inside the place. Okay, I understand that, but I wish we had some flexibility in how we do things, and I guess we don't, because otherwise you'd probably have other people selling stuff out on the sidewalk that you wouldn't want to see, so. I just wish there was, because some things are artistic and have value and add something to an area, a positive add to an area.
Yeah, I understand completely, yeah.
I guess I'll ask that, would you like in your packet the ordinance that the council adopted? Because you're talking about prohibitions, and what that ordinance really did was say, the following things are exempt.
Yeah.
As long as you comply, you can do these things,
That would be
just
helpful.
within these parameters.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
You might actually go, oh, well, we've actually allowed a lot looking at this ordinance, so maybe when you balance it against this, you'll go, wait a minute, this is not unreasonable given the fact that council has said that all these things are okay. And there is a little bit of inconsistency. There is one place in here where we say 2 square feet, and then the ordinance that council adopted, it's 4 square feet, and so we're going to have to make those things consistent, but I think it'd be helpful if you had that.
That would be helpful.
That would be.
Thank
Good.
you.
All right. I think we can bring our discussion of this to a close.
Today, yes.
All right. Any old business? Beat the
Richard,
wave?
did you get the direction you needed, Richard?
I think so.
Okay.
We have the Beat the Wave project update?
Yes, we do. We have scheduled a number of meetings to talk about the Beat the Wave results. They're all preliminary results. Our DLCD person, Meg Reed, says it's not in a format that they care to share, in a paper format or anything like that, because they're still checking to make sure that everything was working properly. They had a problem with an interface between one software and another software, and that kind of thing. So, but we do have preliminary results. We want to share those with the community. And the first time that anybody's going to see them is tomorrow morning at 9 to 11 o'clock here in the council chambers. Our emergency preparedness coordinator holds meetings occasionally that include other agencies, the police and the sheriff's office, the Lincoln County emergency preparedness person. Yeah, I've got.
Is that Wednesday then, November 7th?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, sorry.
Wednesday.
Sorry, wrong day.
Thank you, Gary.
Not today, November 7th.
Okay, right. No, tomorrow morning. And, the hospital and Red Cross, anyway, it's an opportunity for everybody to get together and share what they're doing and try to find some common issues and that kind of thing. So we are going to have Meg Reed with us tomorrow morning, sharing the preliminary results for Lincoln City. And then we are going to follow that with 4 more meetings, as you can see on your list, and you can check me for dates there too, I guess. But on the 27th at the Pacific Baptist Church, we're going to be talking specifically about the Cutler City Beat the Wave results. We are going to be talking about the entire community, but focusing somewhat onto Lake and Ocean Lake on the 29th of the same week, Thursday, November 29th. These are all at 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the evening. On the December 17th, we'll be talking about Wacoma and Rhodes End neighborhoods at the community center, our recreation center. And on Thursday, we have a meeting scheduled at the Oregon Coast Community College for focus on the Taft and Nelscott neighborhoods. I don't think I'd be giving too much away if I said that the Cutler City maps are the most colorful ones
And you guys already saw those, 2 weeks ago or a month ago? The others are very similar. And so we did combine some neighborhoods because the maps looked fairly similar, so the issues would be the same. The description and explanation would be fairly similar. So I hope this sounds okay to you. If you have any input, we'd like to hear it. And I hope that you will be able to attend these meetings. Kate, will they, if, for instance, tomorrow morning, a number of the planning commissioners want to show up, is that going to be an issue? Or, I guess, Richard, maybe that's a question for you?
Yeah, if you show up, don't talk to each other. In all seriousness, don't deliberate and just be an attendee, so.
Deb, did you say that they were not, they had preliminary information, but they weren't going to actually have the modeling completed by these dates?
They have done preliminary modeling. They have results. Meg said that she does not want us to print out copies for people to take home. She is reluctant to even have posters with the material on it. She is going to include it in a PowerPoint and explain it as she's going through. What they intend to do is have modeling for the whole county and not produce a brochure or flyers or anything like that until all of Lincoln County is complete, and that probably will be in the summer of 2019. But this is, and so we talked about whether it was even worthwhile to take this out to the neighborhoods, but it does show fairly good information. I think they're fairly confident. They did fix whatever glitch they had where the software programs were not conveying the information correctly. But there may be others. They just want to make sure they have it all right. But it does bring up the issue, and I don't think it's too far off, and it brings home the message that we can, for the most part in the city, evacuate in a timely manner and effectively if we're prepared. And it does show in Cutler City we have more of a challenge, and that and then it does raise the question of what do people want to do to facilitate the evacuation in all those areas. So we felt that, and we talked with Meg Reed about this, and we felt that it was useful to go ahead at this point. And then we will have to wait, for instance, we will have to wait until summertime, basically, before we will get the kind of maps that we put out for tsunami inundation areas.
So my only concern is that the timing of these meetings is over the holidays, for the most part. Thanksgiving to Christmas, right? Mm-hmm. I know from our experience in Rhodes End, we don't get people showing up at our meetings in November and December. They're just not around. And if the information isn't going to be available to hand them, then it's not going to facilitate getting the information out to vacation rental folks or the management companies either. Mm-hmm. So I just want to make sure that you guys are confident that there's enough value in doing these meetings now, even though people are going to walk in and they're going to want a map. Mm-hmm. They're going to want to have it. They're going to want to take screenshots or something of the PowerPoints. So I just want to make sure you're comfortable enough that these are not premature meetings and that you won't exhaust people, so that when the real stuff comes out and they can actually have something to take home and ponder, they will then show up at that meeting too.
Well,
Yeah, we were kind of surprised, that we were not supposed to have printed material or posters. And so we thought about, well, is this useful or not? I think we have had this build-up, for one thing, over the last few months where we've been meeting with the Planning Commission,
Yeah.
talking about this. Now we have some preliminary results. I think we decided that it would be of interest and useful to get out the information that we have now. Of course, you know that 3 of us are planning to retire in the
Right.
next couple months, and so we're going to have to pass this on to someone else. So we thought, well, this is something that we could do and get feedback from those people who are able to attend. It's not going to be the last meeting that we have, and as we become more confident with the mapping, we will be rolling it out again. I assume somebody will, our replacements will.
So what about, at the last meeting, I mentioned the fact that, I like the idea that we have these little individual geographically specific meetings. However, I may not be home when something hits. I may be at the post office, or I may be at the outlet mall, or whatever. And if you're doing sort of a preliminary rollout, it's almost a sort of an update of where the process is. Did you consider maybe only doing one meeting and maybe doing that city council chamber all community meeting for the general perspective of what's going on, and then once you get the specific maps, you can do, or whoever comes in after you can do the...
Well, we do have maps for each neighborhood,
But you
and they're
can't-
not necessarily pearls. They're a little bit different. We talked about having just 2 meetings, one north and one south, just to make it easier for people to come, and we thought that people would be more likely to come if they were in their neighborhood as opposed to having just one.
Sure,
And
but I'm
so-
talking about this initial meeting where you're not going to give them the maps, and you're not going to have posters up.
Right.
It's really sort of a status report on the Beat the Wave.
Well, it's a means of getting information from the people that attend the meeting, too, of
Sure.
things
but-
that the researcher may not have caught, and I think it has value in that sense.
Sure, but could you not do that at one big meeting? And
I think you're more likely to get, people are more likely to speak out in smaller meetings, and rather than, that's...
I think it's going to be a small meeting
Yeah.
regardless.
Deborah, did you give consideration to having the meetings on weekends?
We talked about that. Somebody had suggested last time having at least one meeting on a Saturday. We just were looking for times that we thought we would not conflict with other activities, and also times when we could get our DLCD, Meg Reed, and our Dogami, maybe our Dogami person to come as well. And so these are the best times we could come up with.
And how will we promote them? How will we get the word out on the meetings?
Well, Kate, have you done anything yet about promoting them, or is this the first time?
This is the first time.
This is the first time we've talked about them.
So generally, now that we've got these meetings firmed up, or at least we think we do, we'd put it on the city website under current news, and then we would, I was planning to email them to at least the Rhodes End and Nelscott neighborhood associations and hope that they would share it with their membership. Also, we ask the library and the community center. The library is really good about sharing on their Facebook page. They have a lot of people who follow that. And then the community Facebook pages that we know have a lot of readers or followers. There may be other ways of...
You have a media list. We'll do a press release.
Yeah, definitely we'll send out a news release to the media, and they're really good about posting those on their websites.
We can put up posters with the time and places. Make sure people are aware that they can come to any of them. And basically, we will cover all of the areas at each meeting, but we will focus on whatever neighborhood we're in, or at the community meeting, well, it'll be Dill Lake and Ocean Lake in addition to
Good.
the
Okay.
community as a whole.
Well, thank you, Deborah, yeah. And is there any new business this evening? Any planning commission training? I don't think so. Any reports and comments from city staff?
Nope.
Attorney? Commissioners?
I have one question.
Isles, yes?
I understood that the city manager was going to have a tour, a visitation by the top 5 candidates that would replace Richard, and then he'd eventually have one to replace your position, and I haven't been notified of anything other than hearing that, so I was wondering if the selection process has begun or is finished, or what the heck's happening.
The selection process is going on. They did advertise my position, and they've selected. They've selected a group of applicants to do Skype interviews with first, and then some or all of them will be brought for the group interviews like we did with the Parks and Recreation Director, but that has not happened yet. I'm not sure if it's been scheduled yet. It is happening.
Any further comments or reports? And we know what's going to be on the agenda for the next meeting.
Well, there's the continuation from tonight, and then there's also some public hearings on some zoning ordinance amendments, additional zoning ordinance amendments, one on parking reductions, and some also related to affordable housing.
Thank you. Tonight's meeting is adjourned. And are we off the replacements?
No, lights still on.
I'm getting a little nervous because you guys both.
I know.